Good morning, everyone. Hello.
Good morning, everyone. Did everyone have a good night's rest here? Did everything that yesterday was discussed, did it sort of land? Did we sort of think about this? Did we dream about this last night? Yes. Okay, very good. We're very happy that you're with us early this morning. It's 9 a.m. It feels like 9 a.m.
It does feel like 9 a.m., but here we are.
And we're ready to get started with today's program.
Exactly. We are so thrilled to welcome you back to day 2 of the NECE 2021 conference right here in Brussels. To everyone who's tuning in virtually, a warm welcome and hello from us to you. We're so thrilled that you're all here with us and are excited to kick the day off. We're going to jump right into some housekeeping.
Yes.
Just to make everyone, bring everyone on the same page. So there's a few links that I want you to note or go to. The first one is NECE.eu. If you haven't yet, this is your possibly last chance to register on NECE.eu, to also take part in the online sessions, the online field trip that is happening later today, and to catch the live stream. There's also GatherTown. I know that this is one of your favorite spaces.
Love it. Absolutely, yes. All of the networking stuff, some of the online stuff is done there. It's an 80s video game. We saw it yesterday. It's wonderful. And a lot of stuff is there taking place.
There's a slido.com. Perhaps we can bring this up here on the screen. But through Slido, there's a possibility for you to partake in the sessions, ask your questions, and there's a pin to work with.
Okay.
The Slido is coming up.
Yes.
One moment, please. This is the Slido with the pin 218315 in case you right here in the room or virtually want to ask a question during the next sessions. There's also a hashtag that we encourage you all to use when you post. The hashtag is #NECE2021. You can also go and see what's been posted yesterday, join the conversation. Speaking of conversation, there is a very interactive and dynamic group.
Yes, my favorite, ladies and gentlemen, the Telegram channel. People are posting a lot of things, they're sharing their thoughts on a lot of things, posting pictures. Yesterday we shared some of those. Feel free to post your pictures, and I'm saying that to the physically present audience, but I also want to say that to the virtual audience. Show us how you're following this conference. If you're in your backyard, if you're literally enjoying the sun while watching the conference, then do post that, because we certainly would love to hear that.
Yes, and now over to what awaits you all here today.
Yes.
So as you can see from the program online, today is much more interactive. There will be field trips in person. There will also be hybrid field trips, and there are parallel sessions here in Brussels and via Zoom and GatherTown. Let's take a brief look. We're about to jump into one of the parallel sessions in just a couple of minutes. Really looking forward to this one. And then there's going to be a few hours of field trips and open space, the second round of parallel sessions, and then we're ending the NECE 2021 conference with a fishbowl discussion around citizenship, education, and EU policy. So,
yesterday, we ended the day with a cliffhanger, ladies and gentlemen. And I said, I'm only going to say it once for the people that are here exactly at 9 a.m. It is now 9:10 a.m. So we're rewarding the people who are here, because I mentioned yesterday that it was a very special day for Fatih. I did not say why it was a special day for him. I did not want to make it awkward for him or for anybody else, but it indeed was a very special day. And we're going to be revealing why it was a special day. This is sort of a big moment. I'm building up to it. Ladies and gentlemen, who wants to know why it was a special day yesterday for Fatih? Yes, I see. Lots of people. I think this is the reason why people came this early. I think this is good. Fatih, I'm going to give you a microphone. I'm going to give you the microphone with the purple thing. So actually, here you go. Can you reveal to the audience? Can you stand up for a second? Can you reveal to the audience the day on which you were born?
was the 28th of October, 1986.
Ladies and gentlemen, yesterday was his birthday. Yes. That deserves a big round of applause. Have you ever worked so incredibly hard on your birthday?
No, I did not, but I see it as my own birthday party. Let's put this way.
That is the spirit. Okay. Well, if you see him, if you talk to him today, you can wish him a belated happy birthday, and hopefully you get to enjoy this second day, and you have some time to relax afterwards.
Thank you very much.
Yes. All right. Thank you very much. Okay. We resolved the cliffhanger. This was exciting.
And now we are thrilled to announce the first parallel session. It is a conversation entitled Why the Europe Today Needs Civic Education on Post-1989 Transitions to Face the Change to Come. Let me repeat that. Why the Europe Today needs civic education on post-1989 transitions to face the change to come. I'm thrilled to hand over.
Because, just to clarify, that's going to be the one that's going to be in here. So if you're following the plenary live stream, that's going to be the parallel session. In other parts of this building, for the live audience here, there is also going to be, there are other parallel sessions that you can follow, and there are some virtually only parallel sessions. In fact, there are 6 online via Zoom for the people that have registered. So basically, we need to give the opportunity for people to go to the parallel session of their choice. But I think over here, we can hand it over to Luisa Slavkova, because she's going to be handing this one in this particular room. Have fun, everyone.
Thanks. Great. Yes. You're welcome. These mics all work. Perfect. All right.
Are you planning to stay with us?
No.
Great. I just want to invite my co-panelists to the stage, please. Alicia, Caroline, please come join me. So, good morning from the so-called Transition Dialogue panel in the room. Good to see a few of you with us. So I'm happy not everyone ran away to the other parallel sessions. This is a panel organized by the Transition Dialogue Network. It is a network of a number of countries in Central and Eastern and Southeastern Europe that is devoted to a public conversation about the history of transition to democracy in the whole region. The countries represented in the region stretch from Russia over to Germany, Ukraine, Croatia, Lithuania, Poland, etc., etc. And what we're focused on in the network, which I also have the privilege to be part of, is mainly 2 things. On the one hand, how does the public discourse on transition look like? Who are the strongest voices? What are they discussing? And the other thing is, how is transition taught in schools? Because I think for all of us who are invested in teaching here, we know that curriculum and teaching matters. I have the privilege today to meet my colleagues from Transition Dialogue, whom I haven't seen in person for almost 2 years, which is a great joy. But I also have to say I'm slightly overexcited because this is the first time in 2 years that I'm actually get to sit on a physical stage. So forgive me if I made any lapses here or there. Before we start this conversation, and it is really meant as a conversation, I wanted to present my colleagues on the stage. So to my further left is Caroline Hornstein-Tomic, who is based in Croatia and has a couple of hats there. So she's working at the local Pilar Institute that is focused on the social sciences. At the same time, she's also a co-founder of an NGO in Croatia, Znanje Nedelju, Wissen am Werk in German, for those of you who speak German, that is focused on career development for young high school students. Last but not least, she's also co-founder of the CIVICS Innovation Hub, which is a pan-European organization devoted to civic education. And she's anthropologist as her background. And for those of you interested in the topic of identity, she studied it long before any of us, I think, got interested in it. Then to my right is Alicia Pacevic. As she said yesterday, in the US, they call her Alicia. Alicia is Polish, and she has been one of the founders and directors for many years of a local center devoted to civic education, which we keep calling over the years the Polish Federal Agency for Civic Education, because there is hardly a topic that they haven't worked on. And a couple of years ago, she stepped down from the leadership position, but is still involved in the work of it, and has her hands busy also with a recent initiative that she runs with colleagues of hers in Poland, where they're fighting for the narratives that are taught in schools. And she's going to tell us a little bit more about it as well. She's also a member of the advisory board of this network, NECE, just like also Caroline. And then, really last but not least, to my left is Stefan Melle, who is the director of the organization German-Russian Exchange, that is really focused on the dialogue between Germany and Russia, but also Germany and other post-Soviet countries. He has a really, some would say, a dream come true biography in his own organization, because I think he started there as an intern. Was it the case? And so now he's the director. So any of you who want to know how to go from intern to director, you speak to him in the coffee break. So the conference is looking at the future. It is called The Future of Education, and we talked a little bit about foresight yesterday, but our panel is, I think, the only one at the conference that is looking at the past. And so I wanted to kickstart this conversation by asking you, why do you think we need history teaching as civic educators? There is a whole body of literature that says we better forget history. It inspires conflict. There is this recent book by Susan Sontag's son, who spent 10 years on the Balkans, and after reporting about the wars, he thought teaching about history is really not a good idea. It only inspires conflict. So why do you think we need history teaching as civic educators? Please.
Okay. Thank you very much. This question posed to a Polish educator, should you teach history, sounds like a provocation. In Poland, we really cherish our history, and with all problems that it creates, of course. I think that, some people say that we should teach history because you can learn from history, and those who haven't learned, have to go through it one more time. I think it's a nice saying. It's very hard to learn from history, especially from the history which is far away. But transition is very close. And this is something that we can still touch. We can meet the people who took part in those events. We can talk to the ones who started it, the ones who were the losers of transition, and the ones who were economically, for example, the winners. So this is not really, this is something in between history and today. And I think that at least in Polish school, there is this pyramid of interest into different time epochs. You devote a lot of time to ancient history. You would better know the structure of government in Greece, in Athens or Sparta, and all the wars they had. Even medieval times are very well covered. Then, you know, it's not as important as it should be, and especially the history of the last century and the history of what has happened after the war, including transition, is something that young people need. And the last sentence. Of course, this is necessary, but it has to be thought very carefully what we teach and how we teach. Now, our Minister of Education is proposing a new subject, which will be called History and Today, HIT. And unfortunately, I'm not very thrilled. I'm thrilled with the idea of having the history being taught in connection to today. But it has to be real education and not indoctrination, which I don't know if it will be the case.
Thank you. For those of our colleagues in the room who don't know what we mean by saying transition, I want to try to get everyone, each of you, your points of view from your national context, what is understood under transition. And so, Stefan, maybe we can start with you.
Thank you. Good morning. For us in Germany, transition is, of course, to a big extent, this quite short process, firstly, on reunification, as it was called, or is called. And then later, the more of 30 years we already had since then, and where we have to deal with the successes, but also problems which came out from this so-called reunification. And for a lot of people in Eastern Germany, I was born in Eastern Germany, on the Polish border, that was not already reunification, even having in mind that there were, of course, a lot of divided families, people really being in contact with the other side, with the western part of Germany. But it was done so quickly, so not elaborated, but getting a ready system that many people could not deal with that. And even more, the follow of this, they felt very soon. That was going down of the structures of the former socialist country, of course. It was losing the industries. It was unemployment. It was really a big turn, at least a big turn in the own biography. And it was, of course, a time of disorientation for a lot of people. Yes, there was a big success getting finally freedoms and possibility for a really pluralistic life. But to work with this, to live with it, and to see it as a value, that is something what would not work automatically. And so we have a politically divided landscape in Germany until now. And see that this new appeared party of Alternative for Germany is coming from the East, is there stronger than ever. And we see that in a time that we have new industries, that unemployment is not so high, that wages are much higher than in the 90s, that this welfare state really is working more or less. Yeah? And we have problems, of course, also in the western part. So this is a follow of the transition period and of this difficult situation of reunification. And I would use last sentence to open the perspective a bit, because my organization, DIA, and I personally have been working for more than 20 years with a lot of Eastern Europe countries, mostly in the post-Soviet space. And the problems we will we see there much bigger. That is really on new dictatorships, as we have it in Russia. That's on a development where it even hadn't a real transformation as it's in Belarus. And in every case, we have an absolutely single history of the countries. To see maybe Lithuania in comparison with Russia or Ukraine means to speak about absolutely different, not only developments, but also points of starting and where they are today. I hope we can later come back to that.
Thank you. Carolina, over to you.
Yeah, I would like to follow up both on Stefan and Alicia's statements, and maybe let me start from the perspective of Croatia to say transition in the Croatian context is of course identified with state building. Croatia became with a transition an independent state because the former Yugoslavia broke up. And that, of course, was a long-lasting process that was already prepared throughout the 80s. And therefore, transition is a good term to actually grasp a period that has no clear date when it started or a date when it ended. And some, for example, the Hungarian economist Lajos Bokros says transition is far from being over, it's still lasting. Or it has maybe been completed in terms of institution building, but not in terms of politics, economic developments, and also mentalities. And in the Croatian context, the transition period, we could say has come to an end, maybe with the end of the so-called Homeland War. That was the dissolution war. So, and after that period came a decade-long process of transformation. Transformation in the political sphere, transformations in the economic sphere, and social and cultural transformations. And those transformation processes are full of disruptions. And the disruptions is what calls civic education to the floor. Because disruption means that there is friction, that there is controversy, that there are highly heated, often ideologized, but also fierce and emotional debates about what actually happened and what direction processes should be taking. And here I'd like to follow up on what Alicia has been saying. Civic education is so important because it means the skill to handle controversy, to actually be in debate with others who see things differently. And especially in history teaching, we often can observe that controversial issues are being avoided, that tricky questions are bypassed, that the focus on the transition period is on factual topics, but not so much on the many frictions that actually came along with the transition and the falling apart of a society, social change. And that tackles individuals' identities and what have been their investments in their own stories and in their family histories. And that is why it's so charged until today. And civic education is a victim of that energy in society, because there's also controversy about how civic education should be taught, who should be teaching it, in what way should it be taught. And I find very relevant that we look first of all at the skills that civic educators need themselves, which means to arrange and moderate discussion between people who have very diverse perspectives and who are politically definitely clashing. So far from my side, and great. I'm happy to follow up.
Thank you. Stefan, let me first give the floor to Alicia to talk from the Polish context, and then I'm going to hand back over to you.
Okay. This is exactly the point. If you think about transition, in fact, in Poland, you can think of solidarity movement, which was 10 years earlier as the start of transition. And many people think that 1980 was the real start of the changes. Then we had martial law, and then roundtable talks in 1989. And formally, maybe this is the moment when we could think about it. But what is interesting is that public discourse intervenes so much in our representation of transition and is really impacting the way it's taught in the schools. Talking about the frictions, just imagine, we had a question from one of our colleagues from Germany who has sent to me and my colleague, Staszek Zakroczymski, who was part of this endeavor, a question, how is transition defined and seen in the public discourse? And our answer was, there is no one public discourse in Poland. We have two completely different narratives on transition. In one narrative, the one, let's say, more connected with neoliberal forces which were in power at the beginning of transition, let's say till recently, till 2015, Lech Wałęsa is a hero, maybe with some sins, but still a hero. In the other narrative, he's a traitor. He was a secret communist agent. In the first narrative, it's, Kaczynski brothers were part of the transition efforts, but they were not the initiators. In the right-wing story, this is the Kaczynski brothers who really started the whole resistance and solidarity movement. In the neoliberal sphere, it was a success with problems. In the other, in the right-wing narrative, it's the half of Poland as victim of, at least in economic sense, but more in a moral sense, because the transition was associated with values and changes which are not in accordance with Polish traditional religious things. So, and this is, I could go on. I mean, this is a long, very different, two different stories. And now imagine being a teacher in the school. In the school where you have students and parents from both bubbles, and you have a director that usually doesn't say where he's from, but you can feel it. And if you have an inspector who is nominated by the minister, and the narrative of the minister, So really, I think it needs a lot of courage and a lot of competences for teachers to even try to think about what conflicts are involved and what frictions are we talking about. And I'm really very proud of those teachers who are doing it. Unfortunately, not all of them, and we know many students who are really, who have to learn themselves about transition, and they are complaining. We have only some dates, some names, and maybe one anecdote about how long the queues were and how inflation was growing. But I think this is a big chance also because of this, because a lot of teachers want to talk about it, and students also want to know why because transition is not something that has happened. We see the consequences today in today's politics, so it's interesting for them.
Thank you. Stefan, you wanted to give a quick reaction.
Yes. The first is that we have this different discourses on the national level, And at the same time, we have parallel discourses in almost all these countries, former socialist ones, of Central and Eastern Europe. And we see that the conflicts about this time are also somehow similar. And so one of our general approaches to have this multi-perspectivity, to really see what are the people discussing and remembering about this time in the one country and in the other, and where it is different and where it's similar. And this is very helpful because we see more distinguished where it comes from and what are the follows for today. And what is also important, I think, for our European perspective is that it is not only a question of these countries, yeah, almost 28 or something like that, yeah, but it's also a question for the youth in the west and the north of Europe, also in European Union, because I think that the controversies between the eastern part of new members of European Union, these developments in Poland, in Hungary and other countries, Slovenia, are a problem also for, I don't know, France and Spain and so on. Yeah, they have also to do with that. And moreover, I think one of the factors of Brexit is that we have new members and that this European situation became more difficult. And yes, the Polish migrants getting to London and other British countries, cities were also one of the factors, and they did not understand why that happened and why it was nevertheless right to have, yeah, this new mixture in Europe, and that they have to deal in a smaller form with it. Yeah, they only closed. Yeah, but it's really our new freedom also, which we got just in the end of the 80s and beginning of the 90s. Yeah, and we should defend it. But we should also have enough smart approach to work with it.
Thank you. I wanted to go back to something that Carolina spoke about earlier. You said that when there is controversy, when there is friction, there is a call for civic education, for civic educators to step in. But as also Alicia pointed, there is a certain skill set that a teacher would need to be able to manage that. So what do you think that is, and how can we, with the work of a network like ours, support teachers to develop that skill set?
Well, I would say that this is a skill set that should be a common sense in education in general and not only be reserved to civic education. It is about problem-solving skills, of analyzing the situation in which we currently are and what might be the avenues out of problematic situations, how to build common ground, how to create constituency, to actually state your voice in public. It's about participation and understanding that you are part of a social environment in which you have the responsibility and the possibility to actually determine and participate in determining about where this community is going and heading. And for that, of course, we also need to understand the situations in which we are. Therefore, civic education today is, of course, about health literacy, economic and ecological literacy. It's about not just the institutions of a democratic society and how it differs from non-democratic societies, but it is to actually to be equipped to face up to the challenges of today and how they might develop or aggravate tomorrow. And that is something that is also an argument for setting civic education into an interdisciplinary context and drawing other subjects in, or starting a conversation between subjects if we now talk about the formal sector. I also feel that the informal sector is a very, very important field, and it's been a victim and also an actor in the polarizations of society very often, and been absorbed in this you or us and where do you stand, which is, it is something that should be tackled. Also from within the non-formal sector, it's very crucial. In Croatia, the non-formal sector has partly been involved, for example, in developing curricula for civic education, then been eliminated from the process, then again been drawn in, depending on who was in charge of curricular reform. I feel that we have a public space today which is so subdivided, as Alicia was saying, and so in bubbles of like-minded people, reinforced through social media communication. I'm not telling you anything new here, but this is a daily challenge, and school, of course, is still a place where difference is meeting and where you can actually talk to the other who thinks completely different, and not to use that chance is a real waste of a skill that we all need to actually find a strength in bringing society together for a cohesion of society. And one of the major challenges in the context in which I live and work, Croatia, and before Croatia I lived and worked in Bosnia-Herzegovina, is that you have state-building processes which are ethnoculturally driven towards homogeneity. And at the same time, you have social and economic processes and political processes which are counter to that, which enforce pluralization, diversification, friction. And this kind of asymmetry is a major challenge which I believe civic education would be the right forum to actually address. And when I came to Croatia after 5 years in Bosnia-Herzegovina, I was stunned how everything was about us. Who are we? It was so much at the heart of daily life that this was not taken for granted, but this society was still very much in this ethno-national identity building process. And this is much less so today, after now almost 17 years that I live in the country, because it has become part of a bigger context. European accession has, of course, EU accession has played a major role in boosting diversity in the society, in bringing in people from outside, in fueling migration, meaning also mobility from Croatians who, before EU accession in 2010, were the last in the Balkan region or Southeast Europe who, amongst the youth, would want to live elsewhere. It was stunning. Youth in Croatia thought it was the best place to be, in the Balkan Monitor, for example, at the time, and very non-proud to move around. 3 years later, it was a completely different situation. And it started to become part of a way of life of a young generation who actually is a post-transition generation and has no more memory of the immediate years of the transition, to explore Europe, and also to understand that exploring Europe, being mobile, is related to social status, to economic possibilities. Also, that creates a greater awareness of difference and of diversity in society, and it also brings forth the friction that comes along with it. So these issues need to be out there and discussed and not avoided, otherwise they create a very explosive energy in society that we, of course, are dealing all over.
Right, thank you. I want to pick up on talking about young people and how they, how their mindset is changed by virtue of not having been witnesses themselves of a certain historical period. And want to go back to Alicia, because I know that she is passionate about young people just like we all are. And she has been doing some interviews with them to see what they think about transition. And so if we could take maybe a couple of minutes to have a quick look at these interviews, that'll be interesting,
just
I think.
A short introduction. This is part of, I will show you a very short part of a also short movie where we have gathered 5 young people from very diverse ideological backgrounds, 5 online journals and also environments. One is liberal, the other was very much left, some call it leftist, then conservative, even half national, not nationalist yet, but very focused on national identity, and Catholic. But Catholic, I would say mild Catholic, not radical Catholic. And we have asked them whether it makes sense to really teach transition and why should young people be interested in it. And this, we came up with a very nice mosaic of voices, and all of them point to one, I mean, they have different perspectives, they focus on different things, left focus on the economic situation of workers and women and so on. But one message is clear, that you can't understand today if you, in Poland, if you don't see what has happened here 30, 20 years ago. If we could have this short video now, it would be great. It's 2.5 minutes, so.
Licealista, licealistka powinna przejmować się tym wszystkim, naszymi prawami i wolnościami. Czasem mówi się przecież, że to jest coś takiego abstrakcyjnego, odległego. Wydaje mi się, że jest to kompletnie nieprawda. Jest zupełnie odwrotnie. Możliwość mówienia tego, co się chce. Możliwość, poczucie bezpieczeństwa związane z tym, że nikt nie może aresztować nas z byle powodu. To są rzeczy, które są ważne na co dzień, tylko są tak naturalne, że traktujemy je jak powietrze. Zawsze istnieje ryzyko, że ktoś będzie chciał te prawa i wolności ograniczyć albo odebrać. Dlatego jest tak ważne, żebyśmy przeciwstawiali się tego rodzaju dążeniom i koniec końców tylko obywatelska wola, tylko wola ludu, jak czasem się mówi, gwarantuje to, że prawa i wolności będą trwać.
Po 1989 Polska stała się częścią globalnego świata i bez znajomości korzeni tej transformacji nie zrozumiemy tego świata.
Niezależnie od tego, czy wy jesteście wierzący, czy nie, społeczeństwo Polski składa się z osób wierzących i niewierzących i Kościół katolicki będzie odgrywał w nim nadal znaczną rolę. Jeśli chcecie zrozumieć, dlaczego znajdujemy się w tych relacjach w takim, a nie innym miejscu, moim zdaniem warto spojrzeć właśnie na okres transformacji, na okres, kiedy ten nowy układ, relacje między państwem a Kościołem powstawał.
Zainteresowanie transformacją systemową po 1989 roku jest niezwykle ważne, ponieważ pozwala wyciągnąć pewne wnioski i zidentyfikować błędy, niedociągnięcia, które zostały popełnione i nie powtarzać ich w przyszłości, móc je przezwyciężyć.
Prawa kobiet, prawa mniejszości seksualnych zostały w czasie transformacji zepchnięte na margines. I myślę, że to, czego możemy się uczyć z tamtego okresu, to właśnie to, żeby nie dawać się zepchnąć na margines, tylko żeby się buntować i żeby walczyć o sprawy, które są dla nas ważne.
I invite you to see all the movie because then they go into the areas of interest. And I really think that, at least for the young people that I have shared this movie with, it was, oh yes, the women, though they were so much present in the transition, they were authors of many, they were mobilizing people, they were organizing underground press, they were part of every ruling body, but they were all the time behind men with mustache. And each of those perspectives is really tells us something about Poland, about the transition, but in general about social change. And that's why also when we we have shown some of our materials on transitional justice. We have written a transnational lesson plan on transitional justice. And we have shared it with people from Spain and Portugal. They said, whoa, this is something that we could also have in our countries, because we have never really dealt with this topic. And it's good to really have some basis for, let's say, in this particular lesson plan, there is you can see how in different countries this question of how should we punish the ones who were in the oppressive regime, how it was solved. Beginning from Radbruch formula and Mauerschützen in Germany, and ending with very mild and also controversial rulings in Poland, for example. So, and this has consequences. Many people in Poland say we haven't really had this rite de passage from communist times to new times. So, and this was lacking. Why didn't we really punish the ones who were responsible? And I think many people, especially those who are now, have this anti-transition culture or statements, they are part of this idea that it wasn't done properly. And for young people, it's important maybe not, to dig into the past, but to see what could have been done differently and what differently we can do now with the transition we're all still in.
So if I can just summarize it before handing back to Stefan for a comment, is that as opposed to probably history of medieval times or ancient times, the history of transition is very much about the present. So it's very much involved in the fights that we're having today. Over to you for a quick comment, and then I'm going to open for some questions from the audience. Yeah.
I think that what Alicia said about social change is very important, because it's obviously much slower than some political development can be. Yeah, politics may jump, but social change and mental change is much slower, and we have to organize also that and to manage it somehow. And it's a question not only of civic education. That's also, we have to understand that young people and every in the society has his witnesses. Yeah? That's our parents, that's our neighbors. All they will tell something about these times, and some are also interpreted for today. Yeah? What does it mean for their biography, for their way of life, and for their current situation? And so we have really a need to actively speak about in the schools and in other spheres too. And as politics are jumping sometimes, we will have also different waves of interpretation of this time. And so it's, of course, will affect also the schools. And here was already spoken about the necessary courage, yeah, in the situation by the teachers, by the school directors, and so on. But if they will not have it, yeah, there's also very important to have the non-formal sector, the civil society really, which will stick to these general idea, and that it's necessary to have this difficult discussions all the time, yeah, and that will not leave it.
Maybe just to add one more aspect to the debate. I think social change, as you've been pointing out, is something that goes slow. And that really is a generational project. And one of these slow changes is the transforming of an inherently authoritarian setting. And that is so embedded in the educational system that I've seen. The first time when I was giving a course at university, I was really shaking from insecurity because nobody was asking me anything. And it took quite some time to kick off that this course is about dialogue and discussion, and that I wanted to hear the thoughts of everyone in the room. And that was not part of the educational setting and implicit agreement between teacher and pupil, student. And I observe now in what setting my children are growing up. And of course, also, this is breaking open, but it's a long process of breaking open. And if we talk about lifelong learning and the skills of today and tomorrow and critical thinking and so on, this is not really an inherent part of the educational process, and therefore it is so crucial to make a point about that. And here again, I believe civic education is a major player, or should be a major player.
I like very much this comment because there is a whole chapter, I think, in one of the publications that this network did, which one of my colleagues, I think, will distribute after the session, where we talk about the fact that I think in the transition years there was a really great focus on the elites and the institutions, but what was lost a little bit was the focus on the general political culture of people, something that someone like Havel would call civility, which is not necessarily a question of high culture, but really about the way we learn how to treat each other. And I think this goes a little in this direction. I feel tempted to throw the ball back to you, Caroline, because there is a question that speaks about what you were just mentioning, the fact that this sort of authoritarian setting is not so quickly gone. There's a question coming on Slido, and I'll read it out loud, but you can also see it at the right there, the third one. We're seeing rollbacks and authoritarianism all over Eastern Europe. What is there left to do for projects like yours? Do you want to pick on this one?
I become repetitive, I think, but now it's more important than ever. And you have phrases easily stated in communication like, I don't know whether this democracy really works. That's something you can hear between kids talking to each other. So what do they actually associate with this democracy? And how does it come that they believe a more authoritarian setting would probably be more prone to safeguard their interests? And this is where the discussion needs to start. The discussion also about the past or about what's happening and what comes along if your rights are going to be limited again. And that is something that I often see is circulating also around the topic Istanbul Convention, same-sex marriages, sex education in schools. So let's go in this discussion and have it between at home and in informal settings as much as in non-formal settings. So the readiness to debate is something that we need to preserve, and kids often think this is another conflict. Yeah, through friction we get close also, and that is to be defended and to be shared in the community. And therefore I think it's also good to start the conversation why, what is your take on the transition? Of course we live in societies with lots of entanglements. You have an NGO leader whose father was a state prosecutor and deciding about people to go to prison. these issues should be addressed and discussed. We need to think and reflect about where do we stand, where did we profit, how do we profit today, where are we privileged against others. And so to be having that kind of also honest discussion is something I don't see yet, and I also throw this self-critically in our discussions in the non-formal sector, because there are lots of people who actually are coming from elite backgrounds, let's put it bluntly, yeah, and backgrounds of having been privileged in the previous system.
Stefan, I also want to hear particularly your point of view, also as the leading part in the Transition Dialogue project. What is there left to do for a project like Transition Dialogue?
I think a lot, and on every level, because it's not only directly implementing civic education and giving some materials and formats and lessons learned to elaborate and all that, but it's really to convince the people from really teachers and teachers associations to politicians that it is necessary, yeah, and also to understand that this under-complex perception, as it has it normally in all our countries, will really damage for now and for the upcoming years, and that this learning of crises and for coming crises is also really a topic. And I see that this migrant crisis, if to call it so, of 15-16, was also the task to manage it in a way that is for the societies doable, that all can live with it, with these changes, very quick changes, and that at the same time we really will stick to human rights, to human rights, and that we will really also a society of ready to welcome people, yeah, and here are really interesting questions on the board.
Let me maybe just first read out one of them so that the others also know what the questions are about. There is a question about the perception prevailing that Eastern Germany, quote unquote, got lucky with the reunification. So they got it the easier ways. And the question is, would you agree?
Yes and no. Of course, in comparison with people in Russia, other post-Soviet countries, we are really even lack of products, lack of money, and as at all, yeah, a catastrophic situation in the beginning of the 90s, that was easier. In comparison with the Balkan countries, where people experience a war, really a war, and not only one. Of course, we had an absolutely better situation in Eastern Germany. At the same time, all our countries have these questions of identification, self-identification, self-empowerment. And for many people in Eastern Germany, that was disempowerment. This was losing self-definition. And even they found unexpectedly this tendency to love even some phenomena of socialism. Yeah? And so we had this big discussion on Ossi, Wessi, Eastern people, Western people in the 90s in Germany. Yeah? And it was a big conflict. It was, to jump to the second question, it was a new colonization perceived by a lot of people, not by all, of course. Yeah, and it was given as a kind of victory of the other part, and this is really affecting the situation until now. And we should not have this changes as a kind of victory of some part. We should really understand this difficulties of changing.
Thank you. There is one last question on Slido before I open for questions from the audience that is physically present here. It goes into the direction of the discussion yesterday. Do you think that Eastern European transition is a process of decolonization as well? Alicia, I'm tempted to ask you.
It depends on how you define decolonization. Of course, transition was a process of gaining sovereignty, of gaining independence. And for Poland, I think for every country, we were all colonized by the Soviet Union in a metaphorical sense. So I think that very often in today's discussions, we tend to forget that this was one of the crucial things that really happened there, that we became an independent nation. We are now allowed to do our independent mistakes, but this is on us. It's not on the Soviet Union, it's not on the superpowers.
Sometimes they blame it on the European Union.
Yes, sometimes, but not everyone. So I think that this was a process of decolonization. And what is also interesting, that in the debate on decolonization now, Poland also has its stand, though we didn't have colonies. We were dreaming of Madagascar as our colony in just after gaining independence 100 years ago. But luckily, this was just, a dream of one or two crazy marshals. But we really have colonized half of Ukraine. I mean, Polish noblemen were exploiting big areas to the south of Poland now in its borders, and we were enslaving Polish peasants till the middle of 19th century. Now we have a lot of wonderful publications about how Polish peasants were really slaves, possessed, punished, killed, beaten by their owners, noblemen owners. And this, I think, this conversation also is happening thanks to this decolonization discourse that we are taking part in. And one more thing that I would love to say is that coming back to the question, what is there left to do for a project like yours in the moment when we have rollbacks? This is exactly why we should have such projects. Because I think that transition is a perfect point of departure for a conversation on how people get mobilized, how people get manipulated, how certain social processes get their own dynamics. I love the story of roundtable talks. I know it very well because my husband was a secretary of one of the small tables, political table at the round table. And this is a wonderful zoom into how social processes get their own dynamics. No one really knew that the roundtable talks would go so far as they did. They got their own dynamics, which led them to a completely more radical place than everyone thought, even the solidarity part. So this is a perfect place to zoom out, to see what's around, that in other countries also the same processes happened, to zoom in and see why certain people took certain decisions and how, negotiations went and so on. And also to get the competence to analyze critically the things that happened and that we can read of and hear of. So I think this is perfect citizenship education for today, where we face those problems.
I'll come back to the handbook that the Transition Dialogue Network is working on currently in a moment, but I want to now use the opportunity to open to you if you have any questions or comments? I'm not sure if we have on. Just give me 1 second.
Thank you for providing the opportunity to bring in a question. I want to take up one comment from Caroline Hornstein-Tomic about these school kids talking to each other, whether it makes sense still to invest in democracy, to believe in democracy or not. I think this is a crucial question, and I would like to relate it to morality. Usually we do not talk anymore about morality in political context, but for me it's the question what moral position I can take or I will take if I give up democracy. And I'm not sure how these students would react on this, whether they think of morality maybe as, of democracy maybe as a moral standard they cannot live with anymore, and that they are willing to give up this moral standard of democracy in order to safeguard some of their interests. For me, this is a context where we also have to discourse, have to talk about what is the moral idea behind the society and governance system I want to implement in order to make this society work. I'm not sure whether this is a question for you. I could also phrase it as a question with regard to transition. So how was in the transition period, was there a discourse on democracy as a more moral system, and is this discourse still useful for educational settings today?
Thank you. Do you want to say whom you want to pose the question to? Okay. Stefan, go ahead.
I think to work with the German moral is of course very difficult, and so it's a question of values and society values and individual values. But if we can stick to such universal values as we see it, human rights and so on, of course we can discuss it. And I think one of the lessons we should learn from the transition controversials is that we should not too narrow all these discourses. Yeah? That we should really have in mind also other perspectives. In the first years, there was really a big emphasis on, finally we have the freedom, finally we have the possibility to move, finally we have really also a rule of law where people's rights are guaranteed, yeah, at least more or less. And it's all true. Yeah? But to see also these other sides, these other really experiences, and to include it and to come to a more complex picture. This is, I think, our task. And then, again, difficult to see what is moral here, but to have here this challenge, not to narrow this complexity. So I would say it's the main point for me.
I mean, this is a highly complex and philosophical question that you're raising, and I have to bring this down, let's say, to, first of all, I think the aspect or the idea of agency. And agency makes sense if it encompasses not only your individual interest, but the interest of your counterpart as well. So, be it the social community in which you are, or the classroom in which you are, or so. And I feel that this is a bit in conflict when you have discussions about democracy as anything goes, or everybody can think whatever they want, and this is democracy. This is sort of put into a either-or alternative discussion, and of course this is where you need to start and to say what is the non-democratic let's say, common ground on which you then would stand. And what is missing in the conversation about democracy is an idea about the common good. And the discussion about the common good has been in the post-Yugoslav space very much a discussion about national interest and national self-determination. And I believe that we are now in a time where a different discourse about the common good can start. And this has a lot to do, of course, with the environmental challenges of society, and this has a lot to do with the future of the welfare state, and this has also to do and relates to the topic of migration. And I'm talking about another migration than the migration that you've been mentioning before. It is the emigration of the young people from the region, which is a major issue in public debate today and seen as jeopardizing agency for the common good of society, because the young and the well-educated are the first to leave. Are they coming back? Do they find worthwhile to be returning and to vest into the common good and the prospect of the welfare state in which they grew up and were educated? And this is kind of a discussion which I believe is crucial, because there is in the societies we talk about, mainly also in the Baltics, in Bulgaria, in Croatia, a huge demographic change, or let's say shrinking society processes, and this is fueled in addition by the emigration of the young. And it's discussed in public like the society is disappearing. And I feel it's a discussion that we need to look at much more from the receiving society's side as well, not only from the sending societies, because people are coming to Germany, let's say, and stay in Germany. And Germany and counterparts in Germany wouldn't discuss this as something that has really severe consequences for the sending societies, and also for the sending societies as a political space. And it is also potentially threatening to sustain these societies, not only economically, but also their political democratic discourse, their diversity, their controversy, and their skillfulness. So that is another aspect which I feel has not been mentioned yet and is inherently connected to the question of the future of democracy in the regions in which we are, and to the patriarchal and authoritarian backslashes that we experience in waves.
I just wanted to make a comment on that as well, and then hand back for a question to the gentleman at the back. You know the famous quote, "Don't ask what democracy can do for you, but ask what you can do for your democracy." And I think this is not the case in our region necessarily. And the reason why I'm saying this is that people had, a little bit like the Jewish migration waves to the United States, expecting really to find gold on the streets. And so the hopes of people in the 90s were raised so high that they couldn't possibly be met. And so you live with a perception that democracy is not doing anything for you. And in many of our countries, it really is failing people. And so I think it is really a legitimate plea on their end to have democracy really to deliver the things that they can touch. And I think the aspiration to the moral of democracy would come secondary then. I feel like there is this need to have a transactional perception and really, you know, to see that democracy is delivering something to you. So this was the only comment that I wanted to make. Question at the back.
Can you hold the mic a bit closer?
A bit louder? Yeah.
A bit lower? Okay. I think you have to give young people a chance. And part of the process of giving them a chance is the opportunity to spend part of their life studying, working in another European country. I mean, they're well aware that it improves their chances. I think what's lacking is building democracy and politics into that process. Those people who move to other countries should have the right to vote there, not only in local elections or European elections, but national elections as well. And for that reason, we're pushing a citizens' initiative to accompany freedom of movement across Europe with full political rights. But I would be quite careful about questioning the value of freedom of movement. I think it's very important for the young generation. I think reforms are possible. I mean, we as a Foundation on European Citizenship have proposed something like a free movement solidarity fund, so that it is perhaps more socially responsible in some way. But I don't deny your own children the opportunity of Europe. Another thing I'd like to say is that I think the education in democracy must be extremely difficult, because we live in societies where we recognize that democracy isn't perfect, but somehow better than its alternatives. And it's a process. It's never complete. It always has to be fought for and progressed. But it also means that we're curiously lax about democratic standards. You know, we seem to accept things which in other areas would be really very clear red lines about what's working and what's not. But I just want to contribute that as what I see as a difficulty, both in education and in campaigning for more democracy. There's a certain sense in which this is an area where reforms are necessary. They're never easy, because some political parties are for, others against. It often requires constitutional change. Changing methods of voting is not easy either. So the effort required to improve is often quite disproportionate to the results you can actually get. Of course, that should actually encourage us to be more active and to do more. But I'm just saying it's a very, very difficult area.
Thank you. I think we all can agree on that. Alicia wanted to respond to react to your...
But before I respond to your intervention, I'd like to say one thing about the morality and democracy. I think that even in our lesson plans on transition, there is a lot about morality, maybe not in a direct way, saying that, you know, democracy is better than totalitarian regime, but the whole moral message is there, and I think it should be there, especially when you deal with conflicts of values and of, you know, good things like freedom and justice, or security and freedom. And this is something that is really the core of citizenship education, and should be. And because this is where all conflicts start, and I think a classroom is a perfect place to really try to solve the questions, you know, to what extent should, for example, a person be blamed and punished if he was part of a Mauerschützen group, yes? Who is and why? And what is good in punishing the ones who were shooting, and why the different verdicts for different people that they were taken. I think this moral aspect is there. Sometimes, unfortunately, the teachers are not even aware, like, you know, Molière's hero, that they are speaking prose, that they are having morality there, and I think this should be more transparent, because it's about good and bad in politics and in the world. And I'm very happy, Tony, that you came here, and I like very much your proposals on the right to citizenship education if you are a European citizen. I think it's a natural one of the rights that every child living in Europe, not only being a citizen of Europe or being a child of citizens of Europe, but every child living in Europe has a right, deserves decent citizenship education, because it really has a crucial bearing not only on his or her life, but on lives of all of us. So I'm with you. I'm also disillusioned with many, you know, talks with people who might be able to pass it as a law, but I think we have no other choice than to really think of a European platform for citizenship education, because then otherwise, well, I won't go into crystal ball, but I see the dark. Yeah, okay. 3 o'clock here, we will talk about what can happen if we don't have, you know, the right to citizenship education for everyone. And students feel it. I mean, students want it. One optimistic thing from Poland. This is, I know you can't believe there is anything optimistic from Poland, but younger generation is not vulnerable so much to authoritarian, nationalistic or neo-fascist slogans and movements. Yes, there is a part, and they are mostly boys and young men, undereducated, and they tend to support the radical right, nationalist. You will see probably on the 11th of November, march in Warsaw, you know, because, but this is organized by parties, by associations, supported by the ruling party. So this is really not, and this is not big. Among the young generation, less than 10% support the policies of the present government. So this is really, they are resistant and they are critical. So this is a piece of, and I think this is also thanks to good civic education that they were getting before. Thank you.
Quick reaction also from Caroline and then from Stefan.
What I find important, and Tony, I'm completely with you. I'm a big promoter of mobility. It's crucial for European cohesion and the young generation too. So I also hope that we have this mobility from both ends, from both sides, because for now it's much more the Easterns going westwards and not the other way around, because it maybe it's less attractive to go to Zagreb than to Lisbon or so. But this might change over time. But this issue, which I encourage you to change perspective and try to put yourself into the shoes of ascending society. I think that would really our discourse would benefit, our inner European discourse would benefit of it if we make it much more an issue to really take some the other's perspective as well. Because the question of decolonization was raised here. There is an issue of, I would rather say, coloniality in the way in which Eastern societies perceive their position today within the European Union. And this issue is politically highly charged, because there's the perception that you provide the workforce for the aging West, but yourself are being drained from those who are the backbone of social well-being, the skilled, the doctors and nurses, yeah? and you have skills shortages which are dramatic in societies of the East, because you have clearly drain lines into the Western, for example, healthcare systems. And that is a highly sensitive issue, and I do think we need to take that into account when we talk about our common European good.
I would say that really this transition dialogue and all this dealing with transformation and crisis is also intercultural learning. And it is getting to know from other countries and even regions and often local communities what has happened there and how it is perspective there. And what does it may mean for me and for our cooperation, for our, I don't know, friendship. Yeah, and I very support Caroline, who said that this should be in a move from both sides, and a lot of sides. It's not only West and East. Yeah, we have a lot of Wests and a lot of Easts and Souths and Norths and Middles and others. Yeah, and even in every country we have absolutely different situations, and we should all have it in mind. Yeah, and this is also a challenge for us to think about us more critical and to act more honestly. And I see that, of course, all this exchange, what is really a big part of work also of our organization, to organize exchange, this meeting of different people, that can also fail then if you will see that you will not act honest, that you will hit your own problems, that you will not speak frankly about your side. And that there are really, as they often say, there are double standards. Yeah? You demand a lot of them, but will not do it by yourself. And that is really an important issue, and I do not think that we have here a bad situation, or do. Yeah, that's quite developed here, but nevertheless, there are a lot of lacks. And also our perception of ongoing political situations there. Here was a question, what could we do better 20 years ago? Yeah? For instance, to the description on example of Russia, of the leadership of Yeltsin, not to say that it was a big Democrat only, but also to say that he was the first who really organized not free elections. Yeah? That he, to a certain extent, destroyed the Russian parliamentarism. And that the slogan of upcoming Putin, that it will be a period of stabilization, yeah, was for the people there very welcome. Yeah? And that then we could better understand what went on there, and also we should understand that all our perception of terminology, stabilization sounds well, conservatism sounds not so well, modernism is well, modernization is even better. Yeah, that all this is in question if we have to stick to a certain situation on a place. And what does it mean directly, yeah? And concretely? That's very important to think about, and yes, so that would change our memories also.
One quick sentence here, and then I want to come slowly to the closing.
Because I like very much the question, what would you, what advice would you...
Can you leave that to me, please?
Yes.
Okay, so then pause on here. Okay. I'm going to ask you this question for the very end. Thank you. Okay. So we're left with 5 minutes, and what I wanted to do is share a little bit about the handbook that we kept referring to throughout the conversation today. It is a product that the whole Transition Dialogue Network has been working on for the past more than 2 years, and it does a couple of things. It works comparatively, meaning it looks into the textbooks, history textbooks of the countries represented in the network, and tries to understand how transition is taught, and what are topics that are maybe missing on purpose, because these are controversial issues. And it tries then in the country chapters to focus on these controversial topics, and then maybe propose also to teachers ways of dealing with controversy. So it has also a methodological part where it explains how to try to integrate different voices in teaching the history of transition. And last but not least, what it does is it has these so-called transnational chapters, because in the process of researching the curricula of history, what was discovered in most of the countries is that a pan-European perspective on transition is missing. A lot of the way we teach transition in our countries is really focused on the national focus, on the national narratives, and there is very little room for comparison. And so the handbook is going to be out next year. It is in the process of being tested in different schools across the countries, and so we really look forward to having that and maybe being able to share it with you and hear your opinions about the handbook. And since we're left with only really 3-4 minutes, there are 2 more questions in the Slido, but I really wanted to use one which already Stefan referred to a little earlier. Someone is asking if the speakers could give advice to themselves 20 years ago when transition just started, what would that advice be? I would say take the liberty to think of 20 or even 30 years. So what would be the advice you would like to give yourselves if you were talking to your younger self some 20 or 30 years ago?
This is, I think, something that we really should have in mind. And when I ask my older son, who is 30, he's just, like Polish transition, 89. He was born just a month after the first almost free elections in Poland. And he said, well, this is something that I was always complaining about, and I thought you did it wrong. I mean the economic sphere, the shock therapy by Balcerowicz, all the losers, the women who lost their jobs, the men who, from the nationalized farms, who were really left with nothing. They didn't even possess, a square meter of land, and the flat they were living in was, being left completely without any investment. And he said, and I think he's right. This is something that if you're going through transition, think about the 25% of the society who will suffer most, and devote 80 or 75% of your thinking and resources to take care of them. Because if you don't care enough, you will have a backlash later. And my son, who was, of leftist economic position, said, the question that you posed to me once opened my eyes a bit, that maybe it was not as simple as I thought. You have asked, what and how would you do economic transition if you were in the position to do it? And I think that posing such questions, reimagining transition, rethinking what we have done wrong and what could have been done differently, also gives us strategies for now. And this is something that we have to have in citizenship education on transition on every lesson.
Right. Caroline and then Stefan, please.
I moved 20 years ago away from my, let's say, comfort zone. And since then, I'm at times in stress and there's this word hadern in German. I sometimes question my decision. Why have I moved eastwards? Why this is is this the kind of? But I would probably do the same, because I find that's what I want to do with my life, to actually leave comfort zones and to look into worlds that are not familiar to me and to grasp what's happening there. And then there is fate, and it brings you to an environment which has so much lived through and is going through extreme periods of conflict, and yet has so much of joie de vivre. And I can only encourage anybody who is ready to be prepared to leave their comfort zones to do that. It also gives us it gave me a better understanding of what migration entails. We are sometimes underestimating how hard migration can be, and I had a very soft migration in comparison to the hard migrations that the majority of people who migrate go through. So I think this is part of a learning that is a lifelong learning. I'm talking to a community of educators here, so let me finish with that.
Thank you.
I think the transition shows that there are any simple processes. It will last every time for decades. And it cannot be quicker, and it's also, as Alicia said, the challenge to accept also other narratives and other real experience as a part of reality, as a part of our common society, which we have to include and which we have to deal with, and not to lose by ourselves our ideals, but also practice of democracy, of participation, but also of pluralism, and not to give and lost these people. Yeah? And this means that it's on our interactivity, on, as Caroline said, leaving our comfort zones. To speak within our bubbles is easy all the time, yeah? That's clear. But really to speak with the other and to explain our position and to hear them and to understand there's also a part of we could include in our perception, that would really helpful. And yeah, that will last.
Great, thank you so much. So I would like to invite you to join me in thanking this wonderful panel and their great insights that were shared here. So thank you very much for being with us today, this morning.
Thank you, Luisa. Openness.
We can leave the stage.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. You can leave it here. Thank you so much for this wonderful panel. We basically are just a quick announcement here to make.
Yeah, thank you, Luisa, and thank you to the panel of experts. This was a really insightful way to kick off day 2. And also, thank you to everyone who's been, chiming in online. There were quite a few different parallel sessions happening, from hate speech and inclusive discourse to forming a digital European public space, and more. We want to take this opportunity to remind you that there are field trips that are taking place right now, and that there is the start of an open space also today.
Both online and on-site, there is room for an open space to connect with other people. So if you are physically here, you can do so out in the central hall, and if you are online, you can do so at GatherTown.
Exactly. So much on that. There will also be an online field trip happening for the House of European History, which was one of the local organizations that was introduced yesterday in the second Windows to Brussels. And yeah, Victor, do you want to share with us what's happening in the afternoon?
Yes, because let's say you wanted to also see another parallel session. That is actually possible, because at 3 o'clock there will be another round of parallel sessions. It's roughly the same parallel sessions as this morning that will be presented, so you will have the opportunity to do one of the other parallel sessions that you have missed by being in this one, which is always a good thing.
Yes. I think that this is it on our end for logistics.
We should mention the fact that the live stream, there's nothing to do here until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So if you're watching us live on NECE.eu, it is probably better to go to GatherTown because there will be more to do there. We will return at 3 o'clock. There will be a coffee break for the people here, also for the people online. Please feel free to get a coffee. At 5 minutes before 11, the field trips will actually leave. And if they're online, they will start. And like I said, we will be back here at 3 o'clock at the live stream.